Hello, this is Mark here at Garrett's Guitars, and I'm here to talk about nuts. So, first of all, get it all out, get your jokes out now, put them in the comments. Guitar nuts, um, the thing on the head side of your guitar. So, just give a brief history, the hows and whys, I guess, and then we'll talk about this particular Gretsch here, which is in fact beautiful. Um, the nut on a guitar is the traditional material is bone. It usually comes from a cow or some other livestock animal, and so it's not like ivory where elephants were killed to harvest the ivory. The animal that donated your bone nut probably died for another reason. It didn't die for your guitar. So. Bone is very lightweight. It's easy to work with woodworking. You use woodworking tools to do it. Files and saws but being lightweight and hard is what makes it work for the guitar. It doesn't. If you, for example, let's compare it to another material, plastic, which a lot of bones were made out of. A lot of nuts were made out of plastic in the 50s when plastic came around. So you have bone, which for the first hundreds of years of guitar making, I wouldn't say hundreds of years. There were wooden nuts, but bone's what got settled on. And then came plastics, and plastic you can mold it into shape, and that just made it made it easier to work with. Making a mold rather than, or plastic can be, cut a little more brutally than bone. Bone is fragile, so it can be cracked if you work with it in a heavy-handed way. Now they cut bone, really nice bone blanks, probably using CNC machines, so they're just they're easier to make a bone blank. But in the 50s, when the plastic nut came around, it was because to save money and work time. Tonally, it's also lightweight, but it doesn't have the tonal properties, so guitars would suffer a little bit from having a bone nut. Then, when we get into the 70s, we have alternate materials used, not just plain old plastic, but other kinds of composite materials being made, of which a lot of them are named, and there's always like, oh, this is, here's something amazing that's made out of, this isn't really plastic, this is something else, but, and they have improved as well over the years. The bone substitutes have improved. Are they as good as bone? I don't know. That's it's opinion wise. Some people might be right now typing in the comments, of course bone is the greatest material ever, and someone might say no, Tusk is actually, or Graph Tech is even better than bone. That's a debate for the comment section. So let's talk about this. Here's a pretty recent Gretsch, came in used. Yeah, I had it for a little while. He's a Strat player. It's like people are, if you look at my other videos, talking about people are selling their secondary guitars pretty often, and this is one that came in with this. And we see here that old trick. If you look at the nut, he took a pencil and colored in with a pencil the slots, because pencils have graphite in their lead, and graphite is a lubricant, and so by putting that in there, it lubricates the slot. It helps the thing slide. So when I see a guitar that's had pencil marks all around the nut, I'm like, oh, the nut is binding, and that's what we call nut binding, and that's when your nut slot is actually too tight. Because when these are stamped out, they're tight. But when you cut it, when you're making a nut with a file, you're running the file through the hole, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, and you make the smooth path that the string will later pass through. If something is molded and just put into place, or even just cut by a machine and then put into place, it doesn't have that. It hasn't had those what would you call it? The sweeps, the strokes of the For those making bad jokes in the comments, you can put that in there. The file going through the nut is what makes the string want to travel through the nut later. And this has never had a file going through the nut, and therefore, oftentimes these composite nuts will be bindy. People blame their tuning problems on tuning machines often, or their intonation, but a lot of times you get the guitar in tune and you start playing like, oh, this note went sharp or this note went flat. It's because the string is binding in the nut, and when you loosen it here, the distance from here to here loosens, but the distance from here to over there doesn't loosen as much. Or you tighten it here and it tightens here, but it can't pull through that nut, and therefore it's as you play and you're hitting the string for a couple of minutes, the string gets enough vibration or enough motion to move to do that final motion, and your guitar is gone out of tune. So I do speak badly about nut lubes of all types, but especially about graphite and putting pencil lead into your nut, because it is a lubricant, but it takes up space. It's a material, and because you have a slot, the problem is the slot is too tight, and the graphite will help it travel because it's a lubricant, but it never had that file run through it to make the direction of travel apparent for the string, and it's just a little too tight. So what I do whenever that happens is, and so here's the test for that, which is you play a note. So one thing is when you hear that creaking noise coming from your guitar, if you're tuning, from a bing, 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 your nut's binding. Another is you play a note, you tighten it up here just quickly, and then you play the note again. Oh, I'll give you another example. The note will go sharp. And then pull over here. It's flat. Now it's a sharper note. And all I did was I didn't tighten the thing. I just moved it on this side. So that tension moved over there and it hasn't come back yet. And then I'll bring the tension back over here. And I can't quite see what I'm doing. So that's a lower note. And then now it's a higher note. And I didn't move the tuning machine. I just pressed on this side. I made the string cross the nut. And it doesn't want to go back to create equal tension yet. Because well, I mean, of course, this is under much more tension than that, but the tension on this side of the nut and that side of the nut are relative to each other. They have to have an equilibrium eventually. And when the nut binds, it doesn't let it find that equilibrium. And so it will slowly creep back one way or the other. So once again, the solution for a binding nut isn't color it like crazy with your pencil. Now, I don't want to recommend everyone take a file to their own nut if you're not if you're not someone who's used to working with the tools of guitar making. Maybe you should have someone else do it. But the solution is, or sometimes some people just take a string and pull it back and forth through this, and that's a good idea too, because the string is a little bit of a, and over time that kind of happens because as the string has a wound string just has a little texture to it. So you can take a string, a wound string, and move it back and forth across through that slot. If you take the string from the slot next to it and do that, it's maybe a little more helpful because it will widen the hole a little bit. You don't want to widen it too much, and you don't want to deepen it at all. I just lightly run that file through, and hardly putting any pressure on. It will take a little off the sides, but mostly it just gets the direction, the travel direction established for the string. So, that's the nut story in a nutshell. Thanks for watching this video. Watch all the other videos here on YouTube. Go to Instagram and Facebook and all those kind of whatever and look for us there. Leave comments. And thank you, and hope to see you soon.